Today we'll be making butternut squash mac and cheese. For this recipe, you'll need 1 pound of butternut squash, so that'll be about half the squash, 5 leaves of fresh sage or half a teaspoon of ground sage, 1 teaspoon of fresh thyme leaves or half a teaspoon of ground thyme, 1 small onion chopped, 3 cloves of garlic chopped, half a cup of vegetable stock and more as needed, a pound of dry elbow macaroni, about half a bag, and that'll be cooked, half a tablespoon of salt and then to taste, 8 ounces of shredded cheese, so that'll be about half the block, 4 ounces of cream cheese, and that'll be about half the package. First we'll start by cutting our butternut squash. I find it easiest to cut the butternut squash in half so that there's a flat surface to work with, and then after that you can begin peeling your squash. Then I cut the squash in half so that I can start taking out the seeds with a spoon. Remember, you'll only need half the squash, so you can choose which half you'd like to peel and use. Don't forget to cut off the ends. I wanted to roast my seeds later, so I just set mine in a separate pile. I decided to cut up my whole squash now, and I'll just freeze the cubes that I'm not using, but this is about how much I wanted to use for the recipe. So you'll just chop up your squash into small pieces. They don't need to be perfect because we're going to be mashing it for the sauce anyway. Here are the finished pieces. You can just put these aside while we chop up the rest of our veggies. Next, we'll chop up 3 cloves of garlic, then we can chop up our small onion. Once all the veggies are prepared, you can put them all in the crock pot along with half a cup of vegetable broth. And after that, you'll put in your seasonings. So here I am putting in 1 teaspoon of fresh thyme leaves. If you can't find fresh thyme, you can always use ground thyme too, and you'll just put in half the amount, so you can put in half a teaspoon of ground thyme. And the same thing goes for the sage. So you can use 5 leaves of fresh sage, and if you use the leaves, you'll want to mince them. If you're not using the leaves and you're using ground like me, you'll just use half a teaspoon as well. Once your veggies and your spices are in the crock pot, give it a little stir, and then you can either set it on high for 4 hours or low for 8 hours. As this cooks down, you may find that you want to add more vegetable broth. You can go ahead and do that. I didn't at this step, but I did add more vegetable broth later on. About 20 minutes before the crock pot was done, I ended up prepping the rest of the recipe. So I just cooked my noodles to the package directions. I used 1 pound of dry noodles, and that ends up being about half the package of your noodles. Next, we can prep the cheese. I'm using 8 ounces, so that's just over half the block of cheese. And you'll just grate that up. I'll also get my cream cheese ready, so that's 4 ounces, which again will be about half the package. Here's what the veggies will look like when they're done. Once everything's all cooked, you're going to mash this up. So you can use an immersion blender if you have one, and if you want it extra creamy and smooth. I didn't care too much, so I'm just using a potato masher, and it still worked really well. At this point, you'll turn your crock pot to low if it's not at low already. Once it's been mashed to the consistency that you like, you can start adding in the rest of the ingredients. I'm adding in half a tablespoon of salt. I'm adding in the cream cheese here so that it can start melting on the bottom, and that'll make it easier to stir and incorporate with the rest of the ingredients. Next, I'll add in my macaroni. And then I'll add in all of the shredded cheese. Once all of the ingredients are in, you'll give that a stir until everything's melted and well incorporated. Once everything's incorporated, see how you like the consistency. Like I said, I wanted to add a little bit more vegetable broth to thin it out a tiny bit, and then I also added some more salt. Once everything is to your liking, you're all done. And there you have your butternut squash mac and cheese. Enjoy!